Hello and welcome to Accenture Powerful Minds podcast series. My name's Callum and I'm Associate Manager here at Accenture. Today I'm chatting to two of my colleagues, Manisha and Ross, both graduates from our analyst community. The three of us share a common interest in blockchain, so we're super excited to have the chance to discuss it as part of the Powerful Minds podcast. Hopefully we can shed some light on this exciting technology, including how Accenture are helping our clients benefit from it, and also some of our own personal experiences. It's super hyped at the moment. It's a really interesting topic, and at Accenture we're at the forefront of innovating and bringing those benefits to our clients and to society. So hopefully the next however many minutes is interesting.
I'm sure we're going to go into the kind of really exciting things that Accenture is going to do. But before we do all that, Callum, how would you describe blockchain?
In its essence, blockchain is a way of sharing data, right? So if we think right back to the Roman times, how we used to trade back then, I'd trade with you, you trade with me, and we both keep a copy of that trade. I'd write down that I gave you a good and I received some money from you for it, and you'd do the same. So we have our own copies of our ledger. Yeah. You think about how systems are today, that hasn't changed much at all. If I am transacting with you in a bank, your bank makes a copy of it, my bank makes a copy of it. And that perpetuates right through the whole supply chain of all trades and all goods. What that means is that things get out of sync quite easily. So, I can go and make changes to my database, you can go and make changes to your database, we get different copies of the ledger, different versions of the same truth. And that ultimately results in lots of issues with reconciliation and downstream impacts on customers, etc. Yeah. And the promise of blockchain is that it can solve some of those problems, because what it means is that we have a shared view of a ledger, and it's distributed, it's decentralized. It's not one central database, but it's one version of a truth, and it's an append-only system, so we can only update to it. So there's no going back and editing it, and there's no one change that you can make that I can't see. And there's a whole host of benefits from having a shared view of data that our clients can really benefit from, and it's really helping them to kind of unlock that trapped value.
It was interesting that, as you said, you've mentioned the kind of changes we've been having from history all the way to this moment. As you said, this started out as a really interesting emerging technology, but now you've briefly mentioned in the introduction as well, this is a really important and upcoming business case. So why should us, people and companies, care about blockchain now, and what is its impact now?
Yeah, this is a great question. It is an emerging technology. We're at the forefront of it, and what that means is that you're innovating in a space in the unknown, which is exciting, but also risky for our clients and actually in the industry overall. What we've really seen over the last, I guess, maybe 5 years, is it going from being a technology problem to a business problem. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, this technology came about because a lot of very clever people came together. Well, not even came together. Satoshi Nakamoto started off by himself, arguably the Bitcoin example. But a lot of clever people were interested in how it could solve problems in their own lives. What we're seeing now, certainly with our clients and in the market overall, is actually a lot of that settled down and the technology's proven, and there's some good work going on about scalability and interoperability, but by and large people understand now how the technology works. What's actually a much bigger challenge and kind of an equally interesting challenge is how that technology can benefit our clients and benefit society and benefit us as individuals. And there's lots of different use cases, but that's where the market is right now in terms of understanding what business benefits, what economic benefits, what societal benefits this technology can bring, and proving that. But that's kind of where we are now. The technology hype is kind of over in a sense. People understand it from a technical point of view. And now it's what are the real benefits we can bring to society and to business.
Yeah, definitely.
So Manisha, where did your interest in blockchain originate?
So when I was at university, by that point, the rhetoric around blockchain and all this technology was a little bit fear-based. So I was at that point very interested in finance and in trading, stock markets. And it actually started because, there was this whole, again, fear rhetoric that all the jobs are going to be obsolete in the stock market because blockchain can do everything and AI can do everything. And I thought, well, if something is going to make everything obsolete, I better find out what it is and then start reading about it. It's where my interest started, kind of out of curiosity and maybe a little bit of fear, but then it's expanded into kind of wanting to know what all the sides of the story are, where it can actually be used for good, which is where, being part of the Accenture community around blockchain is quite useful to know the different kind of applications and the sides of the story there is, which is why I was actually started being involved in debates around it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess that's sort of where your sort of arrival into the community came when you did that. You debated brilliantly, and everyone was very impressed by your sort of your understanding, both your understanding and also the way you kind of presented the conversation. I think it was around how blockchain can influence Brexit. Nothing else needs to influence. No, not influence. How blockchain may be used to support in a post-Brexit Britain kind of thing.
Because obviously there's already so much confusion around Brexit and around blockchain. So it's an interesting topic to talk about, that combined two bits of confusion. That was one of the opportunities that was really interesting because as I said, I came from a very non-technical background, but I had the opportunity to debate with some very knowledgeable and technical people, which was really nerve-wracking and exciting. What about you?
Great. So I kind of became interested in blockchain and distributed ledger technologies sort of in 2016. I actually did an internship with Accenture and kind of started hearing a bit about blockchain and how it could be influential and useful. But I was coming from kind of an international development background, and I was reading about microfinance at the time and was just quite interested in sort of developing countries and how maybe technology can be used as a tool in those countries. I potentially was going to join Accenture as a graduate, but I also was interested in what I was studying, international development. And I kind of just gradually started to realize that actually blockchain has a lot of potential to sort of shape the future of developing countries. Since then, I've kind of had some good opportunities to sort of work on blockchain with clients that have that kind of interest. So I worked with a client on supply chain use of blockchain, and I've worked with an international development organization to present how blockchain can be used for them. So I kind of had that interest beforehand, and I have been fortunate to get the opportunities at Accenture to bring those interests in as well.
And actually, supply chain, financial services, infrastructure, and digital identity at Accenture are the kind of three core pillars of where we see enterprise use cases for blockchain, and that's where we focus, our efforts around. And I personally have been much more heavily involved in the digital identity side of stuff. We're working on some really exciting projects. ID 2020 was one of our was probably our biggest pioneering blockchain project at Accenture. We partnered with Microsoft and Avanade on that, and that was all about how we can provide digital identities, or provide an identity for 1.2 billion people globally that have no form of recognised identities. So, that means practically that they can't, easily get public services, they can't get their foot on the employment ladder if they're trying to. So the whole premise of ID 2020 was using blockchain technology and biometrics and fingerprint scanning. How could we very quickly create an identity for these people that have no way of, aren't members of society officially? How can we create them a digital identity to get them started, to enable them to start to build up, a profile, a trust profile, if you like, an identity profile, so they can actually engage with the country residents that they're residing in. And
I think these are really amazing projects. And I know I said I came in with an interest in purely financial markets and stock markets, but I think it's really important to realise that technology has an individual and everyday impact, and it's not just financial markets or big companies. It has an actual impact on real people, real communities. And just as you say, it's redefining what it means to have an identity. I mean, can you imagine how much easier it would be to travel if no one had to carry passports or anything around, which is a digital identity?
Callum, Manisha, thanks very much for chatting today with us, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. We've had some great information there from our expert Callum on the blockchain world at Accenture. And one thing's clear from chatting today: blockchain opens up a whole new world of possibilities that we've only really had time to scratch the surface of. Tune into the rest of this series to keep learning about the new technology that's rapidly changing our world. As ever, follow the conversation on our social channels, and if you want to work with us and play a part in shaping this future, head over to our website to find out where you can apply your powerful mind.